Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to my channel. Today we're talking about the CASPer test again, but this time we're going to go over some real-time examples where I will answer two written-based scenarios in a timed situation and show you a more realistic example of CASPer responses under an actual time crunch, including what I did well and what I also could have improved upon. If you want to see my general tips about how to ace your CASPer exam, I do have a different video that you can go check out. And if you are interested in content like this, please subscribe. I scored in the top quartile both times I took the CASPer test, and if you're interested to see what that actually look like, please come along. Now, I'll just do a quick recap for what exactly the CASPer covers. As of the 2025 to 2026 application cycle, it has actually changed slightly. The CASPer still has two sections, but it's 11 scenarios instead of the previous 14. So the test is a little shorter overall. In terms of the word-based scenarios, there are also now 2 questions instead of 3, with a modified 3.5 minutes instead of the former 5 minutes. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to be focusing on the word-based questions. Back when I prepped for this test 2 different times, I still had 3 questions in 5 minutes. So in this video, I'll walk you through exactly how I answered them back then. Just keep in mind that the format has slightly changed, but the approach and reasoning still apply. Now, for the sake of this video, I didn't give myself any time to prepare, no second takes, nothing. I wanted it to be as realistic as possible, so you could see exactly how I think through the scenarios, which look absolutely nothing like all of those picture perfect exemplars that you see online. Now, I'm just going to talk over the time lapse of me completing the questions, but I did want to show you that I am actually doing it in 5 minutes and I didn't edit or anything. This first example covered how you've recently moved in with a fellow student who is also your classmate. Over the past few weeks, you've noticed they've been skipping classes and failing to complete group assignments you're both responsible for. When you bring it up, they get defensive and tell you they've been dealing with personal issues, but they don't elaborate. Alright, now I'm going to pop up into the screen exactly what I wrote. You will notice some spelling errors, you will notice some things that don't look perfect, and that's because that is realistically what happens in the CASPer exam. You have such little time that there is no way that you can put everything together as perfect as every single site online looks. The first thing I want to comment on overall with these 3 questions is definitely my pacing. Immediately you can see that my first question is a lot bigger than the rest of them. Especially the last question, I was really running out of time and you can really tell. And I think something to point out there is definitely to keep an eye on the time. What I did on my actual CASPer days was I marked exactly where 1 minute was and I would move on to the next question. You still have a leftover 2 minutes to go back and edit anything you need to. Now let's go from the top. From my first question, I can immediately note that writing, approaching my classmate in a private and non-judgmental way was a good thing to put. It shows both empathy and concern, especially as I go on to add that this could be pressuring and overwhelming. It's a really good sentence to immediately jump in there because it shows that you can put yourself in other people's shoes, which is a big green flag to a marker. Moving on to some other good points, I mentioned that if she chooses to share her situation with me, I could refer her to other services. And in my final 2 sentences, I also mentioned that if this doesn't change, I will need to tell a supervisor. And then I reiterate that if nothing changes from that point onwards, I will then go to the supervisor. Now I'm using those if and then statements to avoid making any assumptions about the scenario at all, and instead show an escalation path where you can both have empathy for her situation and also show that you're not avoiding accountability and will do the right thing, especially if after multiple opportunities it still hasn't improved. You always want to avoid making any assumptions at all because CASPer tries to put you into this hole so that you get a lower mark. Covering many different potential scenarios that could happen is one key point that gets you those marks. But now to go on to what I didn't like with this first answer. I state that I would calmly explain the situation and ask her what is going on in her personal life. Looking back on it now without the time constraints, this is a bit direct and I would rather rephrase how I said this. I would prefer to say something like, is something going on that is making it hard to keep up? This phrasing is just a little less pressuring. I also say later on in this question that I would give her a warning. It sounds a bit like a threat looking back on it, and I wish I had chosen a better word. Something better would be, if this continues and impacts the group, I may need to involve a supervisor. This sounds a lot less harsh and definitely has a bit more of an empathetic tone to it, which I think is important when you're sitting your CASPer exam. Moving on to my second question, I was already starting to run out of time here, but I mentioned that I would approach with empathy first before anything and allow her the benefit of the doubt. Again, this is a good thing to add right off the bat as it's showing your empathy and is avoiding making any of those assumptions. Another good thing is I say again, if after multiple attempts she's not taking responsibility, my academic responsibilities would need to take over. This was another good way of showing that escalation path and demonstrates how you have both empathy but also can take accountability. However, again, as I was running out of time, there were some harsh statements that I would prefer to change. I used the word word warning again, but another thing I would add specifically with this question is I say, followed by input from the supervisor if nothing continues to happen. In an ideal world where I didn't run out of time, I would have preferred to add an action rather than just saying, if nothing continues to happen. Something better would have been, I'd continue to check in, but keeping records of group work and seeking advice from the rest of the group. This would have added in how I'm also proficient at team collaboration and doing continual check-ins to give them time to improve and change their situation. Now with the final question, this was where I was really on a time crunch. The one thing that I do really well here is that I immediately answer the question in the first sentence. If you're running out of time, you just put the keywords in there that you would want to say. They consider the essence of your whole text rather than a perfectly written response. But then I do go on to say that I believe friendships should be built on respect, especially after being given multiple opportunities. This is where I would make the majority of my changes if I had had more time. End of this sentence can come off quite harsh, and I would ideally want the phrasing to sound something more like, I'd hope we could have an open conversation and rebuild trust after addressing the academic concerns. This obviously sounds a lot better as you're allowing them the opportunity to improve and grow rather than my initial answer that does immediately cut them off. I should have left it more open-ended. Now moving on to my second example, here's a time lapse again of me actually taking the questions. The example was, you've been working on a group project for a university course with 3 other students. One team member consistently takes over discussions, interrupts others, and insists on doing things their way. The rest of the group feels frustrated, but no one has addressed it directly. You have an important meeting coming up to finalize the project. Now, before I break down all of the 3 questions, I just want to say that I struggled with the flow on this one, and I think you can really tell. But the way I managed this was by immediately skipping the first question, because this one for some reason immediately had me stumped, and went on to write the next 2 instead as they were flowing easier. This is a really good strategy that really helped me in my actual CASPer exam, as there's such little time that if a question had me completely stopped and unable to think, I would just move on to the next one, and either the second question will jog something in your memory that gives you an answer to that first question, or you've gone on to give a good answer to the question you knew how to, rather than wasting time on one that you just didn't know how to answer. It is much better to get those marks elsewhere from a good response rather than wasting your time on a response that might end up being bad. The first question was about what you would do before or during the upcoming meeting. Now, I wrote that I would discuss with the rest of my group members, which was a good addition as it emphasizes and shows team collaboration, especially prior to escalating on your own. And this is one of the key behaviors that they do look for. And then I also mentioned that prior to the meeting, I would approach them in a private way, as I don't want them to feel like I'm accusing them. This is again good as it's showing your empathy and how you're giving them opportunities by themselves to realize and understand what they're doing in a non-confrontational and private way. It shows your understanding of group dynamics and how public confrontation might make others feel. In terms of the rest of my response, I think you can really tell that I left this question for last. I mentioned that I would share advice amongst ourselves of how to handle this. Of course, looking back on it, you can think of so much better ways to phrase it, and it's also incredibly vague. Again, it's always better to put action rather than just writing, sharing advice. Something better would be to agree on a constructive approach before the meeting. Overall, probably my weakest response across both scenarios, but I do want to mention that this is completely 100% realistic to what I did on the actual CASPer. You will not answer every response perfectly. What is always good is that every scenario is marked by a different person and they consider the bulk of your response and exactly what you were trying to say. So I just wanted to reiterate that even if you have some responses that you don't feel you did as well in, so did I, and I still scored in the top quartile. Moving on to the second question about how I would approach the team member, I again mentioned how I would approach them in a private and non-judgmental manner. Again, CASPer loves this show of empathy, and this displays really well how I repeat certain key phrases across different scenarios, which is why I really emphasize to memorize just these key terms that you can use across multiple different scenarios, because every single one is a different marker. They will have no idea. I also mentioned multiple different situations where they could have something going on in their life, or they may not even have any idea that they're doing this. Again, using the basis of those if-then statements, ensuring I'm not making any of those assumptions, and acknowledging different possibilities for why this might be happening. Again, back to what I didn't like, I definitely had some weak phrasing, such as the statement causing their behavior to act like this. I would have preferred a different phrasing, such as impacting how they interact with the group. I also repeat near the end of the answers, they may not realize what they have been doing, which looking back is very repetitive, and I instead could have used that time to again mention the escalation pathway, where if they don't change change their ways, you may need to take this further. You are again making sure that you're not making any assumptions and showing good collaboration and empathy. Now, my final question for this scenario is a bit similar to the last two. What I do well yet again is using those multiple if-then statements, such as if their behavior does not change, and then if this second chance doesn't improve. I've provided the marker with 3 potential scenarios. Once again, it is about that escalation pathway where you are showing that you have empathy first, but that you also have accountability if nothing changes. And just very quickly, finally, there is definitely some clunky phrasing here that I would much rather rewrite, such as I simply say, explain how myself and the group feels. Another very vague statement because I was running out of time. I mention again very directly that I would need to raise this with the supervisor, and I would probably rephrase this to say that I may need to raise this with the supervisor, as it does come off a bit less pressuring. So those are my 2 realistic examples. I do just want to end on some final notes. One being that I really did not give myself any prep time, mainly for the sake of this video, but if I was actually sitting the CASPer test again, I would do this multiple times and really refine how I respond. The last point I really want to make as well is that CASPer does not reward polish. It is designed to reward your thought process and values, not just how you perfectly write something. And what I've done here can easily be replicated. To get the scenarios I did today, I used ChatGPT, and just in case anyone's interested in using the ChatGPT prompt that I did, I'm going to leave a comment down below with exactly what I used. Other than that, good luck. I hope this showed you a realistic example of how actual people are answering the CASPer test questions rather than what they put online. If you like this video, please like, please subscribe, leave a comment down below if you have any other advice or questions. I'm here every single Sunday at 9 AM with more vet school content, and if you do want to see more frequent content, I am always uploading on Instagram at becomingdoctalia, so you can check me out over there. Otherwise, that's it. Bye.